Welcome to the Enterprise Mobility Roundup podcast, brought to you by Blue Fletch. We discuss technology topics related to Android and workforce devices and how they intersect with business and mobility.
Thank you for sitting down and joining me today. So this is another episode of the Blue Fletch podcast, and we want to cover today analytics and data around mobile devices. So it's a topic I know you and I have been doing for 20-ish years, since the early 2000s, and I feel like now it's actually cool to do it. So wanted to talk through a couple questions with you that we get a lot from customers, and share some of our experiences and just lessons learned around analytics and mobile devices. And for this conversation, we're going to particularly focus around enterprise devices. So it's going to be the shared workforce devices, the rugged devices that people have in stores and warehouses and supply chain. It's not going to be the personal carry devices. So that's the super duper high level. And I guess, for you, maybe you can talk a little bit about your thoughts on data. So that's a pretty generic question, but when you think about data coming off mobile devices, what comes to mind? What are the key lessons learned that you've gotten in the last 20 years of doing mobile dev and helping deploy mobile devices in enterprises?
Yep. So to your point, us collecting data on devices that are company owned, used by employees, particularly shared, is much different than collecting data on a website that's on the public internet or a personal device. Being an employer and having an employee-employer relationship is much different. So we can collect a lot of data, get very granular about what's going on out in the field. And so, data for us has always been important because you and I have been responsible for, deployment of tens of thousands of mobile devices, being deployed out in the field, whether that's across the US, on the other side of the world in Australia, or just globally. And so you want to be able to solve problems quickly. The last thing you want to do is impact a multi-billion-dollar, business because you can't figure out a problem.
Yeah, 10-hour plane ride to Europe is it's fun when you're going on vacation, but it's not when you got to go solve a problem in mobile device.
Exactly. Or for some of our airline customers, when you think about how much money they spend per minute, and if you introduce a problem and you can't solve it, minutes turn into hours, it turn into days, that really impacts the bottom line of the business. So, data, most importantly is, for us, has been about how do you solve problems quickly, and getting in front of the problems.
Yeah, I think what we talk about this for the great finger pointing game.
Yeah, nobody. Well, people want to point fingers. It's like the Spider-Man meme where like everybody's pointing at one another. Like we're all Spider-Man. But if you have data that puts people's egos to the side, and so it makes it much easier to manage the problem when you're not lumping in somebody from infrastructure or the network team or software team and operations team. Everybody says everything is okay, and everybody's pointing at one another. When you know what the actual problem is and you can point to the data, people can actually get to solving the problem, especially in these big companies. That's very important. I know us coming in as outsiders, you and I have had to be very strategic about making sure that we're trying to solve a problem. We're not trying to get you fired. Just let us help you.
Yeah, get to the root cause analysis. Yeah, my favorite was I had a client that told me to get on a plane and go to New York right away. They had a big software issue and the software wasn't working. Get up there, and the devices, the cradles were all unplugged. So the batteries had all died, and plugged it back in, started working again. It was not necessarily the fix we were hoping for, but we at that point in time, that was early 2000s, they just didn't have the data they needed to be able to manage those devices and figure out and get to the root cause effectively or quickly in that situation. So I guess another thing that has really been, I guess, this buzzword, and it's sort of stopped being a buzzword, but the word big data was something that really, I felt like in the mid aughts, it was or in the late
It's
aughts, it
still a
started.
thing.
It's still a thing. Well, like when you think about big data, what is that, and what does that mean, and how do you think about that from the standpoint of mobile devices?
So big data just talks about data of a broad variety in general that's coming in ever increasing volumes and picking up velocity. So when I think about devices, the broadness is, what can I collect about from that device about what's going on with that device and around it. Uh, so that can be just information about the device. It can be information about its environment, the network, the applications. If I own the applications, I can start to get information about specific features and what's going on. So that's the variety. And as you collect data with more across more devices or across more applications, that's where that size comes in and that velocity, because it's going to continue to come in. So that's where the big data piece of it is. But it really boils down to just analytics, right? The process of actually discovering, interpreting, and communicating significant data patterns. And so if I have a problem, what's the pattern that I see that's leading me to this problem, so I can work backwards to fix it?
Yeah, I guess, do you see it changing much in the next 5 to 10 years? So as we start layering AI on top of it, is that actually going to make it better, or is it just going to make it noisier?
Both. You reap what you sow, right? So if you don't work at the data, if you don't work at making the data that you collect more refined and better, it's only going to be as good as what you put in. So garbage in, garbage out. But if you actually put data that's really good data in, you can start to find those patterns. And so if data isn't structured really well, it's really hard to find a pattern. But what I will say is that over the last few years, storage has gotten cheaper, processing power is getting better and is getting cheaper, and a lot of the cloud providers are bringing value-added tools that allow you to analyze the data a bit better. And so when you have these big companies who have seen some problems and have solved them before, and you can take a model off the shelf and plug it in and just kind of see what happens, it gives you a great place to start and tweak and refine until you build up skills to build something that's custom to your application.
Yeah, I guess, and your business too, right?
Yep.
Not just applications. So I guess on the thread of tooling, when when you think about categories of tools, I always think about there's like the off the shelf, the go build your own, and then there's some of the just like the stuff that just comes by default. So like how do you think, or what's the tooling across those categories you've seen, or things that you like to use?
Yeah, so there's levels, but it depends on how you're tooled as an organization. Are you an organization that is just rolling a bunch of off the shelf solutions, whereas I'm using a big MDM to manage my devices, it's a bunch of SAP or Oracle applications, and as an organization, that's fine. Or am I building and I have control over my applications? So that's one part of it. The other part of it is where do I start? Like what comes on devices? I know with the Zebra devices that we've deployed in the past, they've had RX Logger, so that's already on the device. It's Zebra specific, and you turn it on and you're getting a lot of granular data off that device. If you walk it up or down a level, however you want to phrase that, what's off the shelf that I can drop on a device and collect data. Back to Zebra, they have their visibility services. I know Honeywell and Samsung have their own products, but those are all device specific. I think even SpectraLink has something. You have the OEMs, not the OEMs, excuse me, that was the OEMs, but you have the MDMs or the management systems. So, your Workspace Ones, your SOTIs of the world, 42 Gears, they're collecting data and providing you reports and analysis of what's going on. Splunk has mobile tools for collecting information off devices. B2M, LMS is still out there. And as you know, and I know, we have Blue Fletch support agent. We're able to drop, that agent on the device and start collecting a broad array of data points as far as what's going on. And then, probably one of the lowest levels is custom development. So if you actually have control over your applications, there are tools you can put directly into your applications and get really, really granular data. And so that's, your Azure application insights, Flurry, AWS has a product, Crashlytics, and you can build your own framework if you want to. We have our own SDK that we've been dropping in customers' applications that we've helped build and deploy.
Yeah,
So,
the Azure App Analytics. I think that that's a mouthful. I like what was it called before? Hockey App.
Hockey App, yep. Before they acquired that and they rolled it into their product. I mean, you can even use Google Analytics if you really wanted to. There's a plethora of things you want to do, but it all goes back to control of the data that you have, so that you can find and build those patterns, so that you can understand what is going on out in the field.
Yeah, when you think about the basic what to collect, I know you talked about this a little earlier, but the what are the things, like if you said like here's like the essential like 3 things or 5 things, whatever it is, what would those look like, and where would you tell people to start looking for things?
Yep. So let's just start with the device health. As an organization, what do I consider a healthy device? I remember a time where, a SD card, or you can have memory get corrupted, and a device could get bricked. That doesn't happen much nowadays. Devices are built so much better. The technology is a bit better. But in the early 2000s, that was important. So just understanding your IO was really important. But device health, is it on? Am I having to recharge all the time? What's going on with my battery? The next thing would be network. So do I have consistent network? Do I have bad network drops? Maybe run network speed tests periodically, but just get a sense of what's going on, because a device is great, but a lot of these applications need to be connected. And so, although the device can be very powerful, an application can feel horrible if the network is misconfigured or if you have bad DNS.
Yeah, I know for me, like the when you start talking about those things, like for me, one of the important things I always think about is baselining. So knowing what does good look like on that DNS net. We definitely had, I've seen it multiple times, but definitely had a client. I think we went, they were complaining that the apps were terrible, and we went and pulled data for the sites where the apps were terrible, and they all had bad DNS configurations.
You can't get to the internet.
Yeah, it was just they were falling back slowly across like 10 DNS records, and they're all corrupt. Each one took like a couple seconds, and it made the app super clunky. And then we went and looked at it. I think they had was like 60 plus sites across their facilities that had bad DNS, and it had been that way for over a year and a half. And people just stopped complaining. They just assumed it was slow.
Mm-hmm.
And we made that fix, and every single system in every single one of those facilities got substantially faster. And I just like we found that, and it just occurred to me how much money that company had lost over a year and a half of just having a bad, one bad configuration across those sites. But yeah, for me, it's the baselining is really important to start. Like, what does good look like, and then use that to find those other things. I guess it goes back to your point around the AI is you have to train it. You have to say, here's what good looks like. Tell me when it's not good.
Exactly. Yeah. Tell me when it looks different.
Yeah. So I guess, around like the thread of getting started, like how do people do this cost effectively? I know they have tools can be super expensive, some of the MDM add-ons or some of the tools from the OEMs, they charge a lot of money for, but how do people start on their devices, just like building things out? Like, where would you go if you're going to do consulting or help people move something forward?
Yeah, typically that starts with the conversation. Oftentimes, organizations look at data, especially if things have been going relatively well, meaning even if they're not going well, if they feel like it's going well, nobody's going to want to invest in it. And so you need to find a problem that's painful for people that you can rally around. And from there, you kind of want to have the Goldilocks, right? So, start out with the baby bear, start off with something small that you could pick off where, the investment, if you invested that time, that money, the infrastructure costs, it's not going to be, it's going to be okay if it's throwaway. So, back to, data to collect, it could be something around device health, it could be around network, it might even be around device usage. You might realize that, when you invest, tens of millions of dollars into these device refreshes, maybe let's collect data on how many devices are we actually using to justify whether we need fewer devices or we need even more devices, because devices are used too much and we replace them too often, or even application usage. There was a time with us, working at a big retailer here in Atlanta where we wanted to understand, who's using what apps, because we're just going to retire some applications. If we find out that a significant number of people are not using, this functionality, what's the purpose of supporting it? So, start with a problem that's painful for a collective people that you could rally around, but small enough to where, if you threw away that effort, it wouldn't be a total time suck.
I like that. I do remember the apps we weren't using. There was like four users across 100,000 plus people that were using. So it's like the Netflix problem. Who is the actual user of certain things?
We're still ordering DVDs.
Send
them a Roku.
Send Roku. Along the lines of like tooling for consuming data, like how do you see people actually taking data out? Is like Google Data Studio, Splunk, Excel, like what is or Power BI? What are the things that you, as you're coaching people to move fast, that to be able to actually start making some sense out of the data?
Like ideally, you want to put it in a solution that is suited for collecting data. So I know we use BigQuery quite a bit. A lot of our clients use it, so that's a Google product. If you're in the Microsoft camp, using Power BI, their application Insights has a big bucket where you can just drop data. If you just have a simple database, just collect some records and export that to Excel and just run reports on that manually. It's a great place to start to understand where you need to invest time to add on complexity.
Excel, I like that. Now you're talking my language. Get it in pivot table.
Yeah, if you can get in a pivot table, then you can build AI, you can build a whole Johnny Five or around solving that problem, but you got to start somewhere simple first. And that's only if you don't already have a data team that is used to doing this and they have patterns and they have tools that they're using. But for an organization that is running from fire to fire to fire, trying to figure out how to solve these problems, how can you start to gather data so that you can identify those fires before they happen and make sure they don't turn into full-fledged forest fires.
And I think along the lines of the teams, one of the things I always counsel people on is the tool you're using easy enough to hand off to your operations guys where they don't need an IT guy or a data scientist, use air quotes for those who are listening, the data scientist that's going to go take 4 days to figure out and solve the data or figure out what's in the data. I want to be able to give tools that I can hand off to somebody who's in operations who actually understands the business and have that guy be able to run queries or run pivots or do data discovery and actually figure things out on their own. So I know I personally like Splunk. Power BI has got some good tools around that where you don't have to be you don't have to spend 6 months in a data course to go figure out those tools.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess along the lines of back to the AI piece, like when you think about the future of data and data collection. So you mentioned the devices are getting more powerful. The databases are bigger. The network pipes are bigger. Like what does does everything become an IoT play in the future where you're just taking IoT data off these devices and then it's becoming feed some master IoT system, or is IoT actually going to be related to data analytics in the future?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it IoT, but I understand where you're going. I think what's going to happen is what's happened when you think about how mobile apps have evolved, meaning that, to develop a mobile app, it had to be clean sheet and you had to create your own buttons. But now you have these UI toolkits, or you have the Flutters of the world, where a lot of that UI is set, and a lot of these patterns, we've had years of discussions to figure out, do people like swiping on this type of UI interaction, or, do they want to do something different? And so I think data and AI is going to be very similar, where, these models that'll be publicly available, they can just be drop in. So, it could be, the model that Amazon uses for finding, bad boxes or bad products, right? So it may be available in AWS, and that may be compelling for an organization to, leverage AWS, because now I have access to these models that for years, data scientists have worked on, and they've been applicable out in the field, and I can just plug them in. So I think the same way UI tools have evolved and making websites and applications easier, almost plug and play, you'll see the same thing with data, where I can have a data set and, have a model, and all I'm doing is there to tweak it to make sure it's headed in the right direction, or to tell it what good looks like. So it can tell me when I have an anomaly.
Cool. All right. So just to do a quick summary of your last point on how to get started. So the main things you had were find an actual problem to go solve. And I think the reason painful problem, or you think it was mildly painful, just something where you actually start proving the value. So find that, do something small. So I think you call it the baby bear, mama bear, pop bear. Go for the baby bear first. Find the small problem to go solve, prove value. Don't go start investing in big tools until you actually know how to collect things. And then once you're at that point, collect everything, and then start figuring out the models you want to actually support and run your business. And then I think the other point along there we talked about was make sure you baseline and know what does good actually look like.
Right.
So,
very similar to the proof of concept playbook, right? Start small, get a win, learn, build momentum, and then continue to scale. So it's very applicable to this.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today, and hopefully folks got a little bit out of this, and appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Enterprise Mobility Roundup podcast. If you enjoyed the discussion, please take a few moments to rate us. If you would like to listen to future episodes, please subscribe. To learn more about mobility topics or submit any questions, visit us at bluefletch.com.